Hi, everyone. Welcome to Arise and Eat. This is the presentation on healthy eating prepared for Transition 101. My name is Karmen More, and I'm here with Stacy Young. And unfortunately, we don't get to see your lovely faces today, but we're really glad that you could join us virtually. So I am currently in the process of getting my training to become a registered dietitian. I'm doing a professional master's diploma at St. Michael's Hospital, getting that practical training piece before I can get my credentials to be a registered dietitian. A few years back, I graduated from my Bachelor's of Applied Sciences in Nutrition at Ryerson University. So if you have any questions about Ryerson or about the Nutrition and Food Program, I'd be happy to take questions by email, and I'll provide my contact at the end of this presentation.
So my name is Stacy, and I'm an undergraduate student who's currently going into my third year in the Applied Human Nutrition Program at the University of Guelph.
So we want to thank you for attending and thanking Transition 101 again for inviting us back to host this workshop. We want to take the next hour to convince you of the power that food has to help us honor God, to feel good in our bodies, and to do well at school. Sadly, we couldn't meet you all in person because of the COVID-19 pandemic, but we're really glad to be able to provide some general information virtually, and hoping that we will be able to provide you with some tools to eat well for this school year and for many years to come. A few disclaimers for this presentation. It is intended only for educational purposes because we aren't able to meet you personally. We're providing what we think the average person can benefit from in terms of healthy eating advice, but it doesn't substitute professional or individualized health care information. So do consider consulting your healthcare professionals or a dietitian for more personalized information. We, the presenters, have no affiliations to declare, and this presentation was last updated in May of 2020. Our next 50 or less minutes together, we're going to try to answer two questions with you. The first is, why should we care about what we eat? Why does it matter? And we'll talk a bit about what the Bible has to say about it first. Now, we won't be doing a deep dive into biblical theology. This isn't the place for it, but we'll simply explore some relevant examples in God's word and in the history of God's people. And no matter where you are in your spiritual journey, feel free to follow along, learn and listen to what our Heavenly Father has to say to us. I pray that He will speak to us in ways that we can all hear. And then Stacy will cover what the Canada's Food Guide has to say, what nutritional science to date has to say about why it matters what we eat. And then secondly, we'll take time to consider, how do we care about what we eat? So if we know that it matters, if we can convince you of that, how do we go about practically in our day-to-day life, even starting today, to eat based on Canada's Food Guide, whether or not we are buying into a meal plan. And then there will be some additional links and resources for your own pursuing, giving you tools for how to do this practically, eating well. And then we'll provide our contact information if you need to connect in the future. And also if you have any feedback. Okay. So this is the prophet Isaiah. He is in a scene that is highlighted in the Bible in the book of 1 Kings, chapter 19. And we'll read the scripture on the next slide in just a minute. But the context is that this is a scene of Elijah in the desert. And God has just provided him with some baked bread and water. But his emotional, spiritual, physical state is not in a good place. He's just come from this really amazing experience where God presented himself to all of his people, especially to those worshiping false gods, setting an altar that was drenched in water on fire when the prophets of the false god Baal couldn't even get a single spark going. But after this display, this magnificent display of God's victory, Elijah's life is again at risk because the Queen of Israel, who is leading the people to worship this false god, promises that she was going to take Elijah's life very, very shortly. And Elijah is now running again for his life. He feels hopeless and dread. And his journey into the wilderness is essentially an act of suicide. So let us read the word of the Lord together. He came to a broom bush, sat down under it, and prayed that he might die. I have had enough, Lord, he said. Take my life. I am no better than my ancestors. Then he lay down under the bush and fell asleep. All at once, an angel touched him and said, Get up and eat. He looked around, and there by his head was some bread baked over hot coals and a jar of water. He ate and drank and then lay down again. The angel of the Lord came back a second time and touched him and said, Get up and eat, for the journey is too much for you. So he got up and ate and drank. Strengthened by that food, he traveled 40 days and 40 nights until he reached Horeb, the mountain of God. Let's pause here for a moment. Have you ever felt this way before? When you're not just feeling hungry or thirsty or sleepy, but at your end physically, mentally, emotionally, even spiritually? I imagine all of us have been here at some point in our lives, if not even recently during the challenges of this pandemic. It's too much, Lord. I can't do it. I'm so tired. What is God's response to Elijah's emotions and his pleas? I've highlighted in yellow the words that Elijah said, and then also the words that the angel said and what Elijah's response is. God's response is that he sends an angel with food and water, first meeting Elijah's physical needs, providing nourishment alongside plenty of sleep. When Elijah gave up on his life, God did not. And he restored Elijah first in a hyper-practical way, which is essentially connected to the restoration of Elijah's spirit as well. Notice that Elijah doesn't talk about dying anymore after this. Now, the angel of God provided some supernatural baked bread. This is some stuff that fed him for 40 days, climbing up a mountain, no less. And no amount of nutritional science can explain this. It is a miraculous work. But we know that food is fuel and building blocks for our bodies, and it provides us not only with physical energy, but then ties into also our emotional and spiritual nourishment, preparing us for what we face each and every day, if done well. And when Elijah reached Horeb, the mountain of God, God meets him there and speaks with Elijah and provides direction for the next part of Elijah's ministry and his work for God. So we see here that just like in our current understanding of health, the Bible takes a holistic approach to it. All these aspects, physical, emotional, spiritual, mental, they're all intertwined and they affect one another. So when we nourish ourselves with food, and we think of it primarily as physical, we also notice that it affects how we feel and what we think, and even how much more equipped we can to worship God and do his work and be present in the moment. So having proper nutrition can prepare and equip us for whatever we have going on in our lives. And there are several examples of God's supernatural provision in the Bible through nourishment and food. There's the example of manna from heaven, bread from heaven, that fed God's people, the Israelites, while they were traveling through the desert. Elijah, previous to our current story in 1 Kings 19, was fed by ravens in the desert again. And in the New Testament, Jesus is found feeding large crowds of more than 5,000 people on at least 2 occasions. And he provides them with enough food to feel satisfied so that they don't faint while going home, so that they can continue to listen to what Jesus has to teach. And not to mention that food is used as a symbol of Jesus satisfying all of our needs, reminding us that he proclaimed himself as the bread of life, bread broken for us and wine spilt for us on the cross, paying the cost of our sins and giving us new life. And speaking of bread and wine in communion, it's one of 2 Christian sacraments, meaning it's one of the few ways that we supernaturally receive the grace of God. It's so important in Christian community that Jesus says that communion is something we ought to take every time that we meet together. It shows that sharing meals with other people has meaning and significance. And finally, food, especially in times of hunger, famine, shortages, persecution, exhaustion, as well as celebration, are testaments of God's provision and his love for us time after time. So who could sum it up better than what God has to say in Scripture? Whether you eat or drink or whatever you do it all for the glory of God. And this is from the Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians chapter 10. Why should we care about what we eat? Because God cares. And by taking care of ourselves through food and nutrition, we are bringing glory and worship and pleasing our God with signs of love and affection. And very truly, our Father in heaven blesses us through what we eat as well. Okay, Stacy, take it away.
All right, so what does nutritional science say about why you should care about what you eat? So it actually overlaps with what the Bible says, as food and proper nutrition is needed firstly for fuel, secondly for our physical, mental, and emotional well-being. So physically, proper nutrition and diet can prevent and manage diseases, whereas mentally, it can reduce symptoms of depression and some other conditions, and it also helps us to feel good. And furthermore, food and proper nutrition is actually associated with improved grades, which will be shown more in the next slide. But lastly, it is enjoyable and can enhance the sense of being a community. So here we have a large study that was conducted in 2016 of thousands of Korean high schoolers. And through this study, they found that eating 3 meals a day with an emphasis on breakfast and including a variety of fruits and vegetables, along with consuming less processed foods, so for example, like sodas, fast foods, and sweets, are actually linked to higher grades. So moving on to the Canada's Food Guide, this is the new edition that came out in early February 2019. And this version gives us a better visual representation of proportions of food categories we should be consuming, and is much more practical to apply into our daily lives and diets as well. And the biggest difference between the new and the old food guide is that there are no longer 4 food groups. So now there's only 3 categories of healthy foods, which are vegetables and fruit, protein, and whole grain. And this new version also recommends water as our choice of drink, and it tells us to aim for 6 to 8 cups daily for the average person. So now let's break down the 3 food categories. Why fruits and vegetables? So first off, it includes a lot of fibers, And what do fibers do? Fibers keep you feeling full and satisfied for a longer period of time after each meal. So it is also important to gastric health to keep you regular and can lower the risk of developing chronic conditions like heart disease, diabetes, and cancer. The recommended daily intake for women is 25 grams per day, and for men is 38 grams per day. And most Canadians are only getting half of the daily requirements, so it's not likely you'll get too much fiber in your diet. And secondly, they also contain lots of vitamins and minerals. So from vitamins A to K, iron, calcium, potassium, and much more. These are all essential nutrients that our bodies need every single day. And this is especially true in dark leafy green vegetables such as broccoli, kale, spinach, gailan, which is a staple in many Chinese cuisines. And just a few of the many purposes include being a precursor for generating energy, acting as antioxidants, and performing daily bodily functions. Fruits and vegetables are also naturally low in salt, sugar, and saturated fats, and some even contain good fats like avocados and olives. And it's also very easy to prepare, and there's lots of options. So what are some tips for eating more fruits and vegetables as a busy student? So for students on or off a meal plan, you should try to consume healthier snacks. So for example, vegetable sticks like broccoli, carrots, cucumbers, have fruits with yogurt, and add some vegetables to your soup. And it can be difficult to incorporate as many colors as possible into a single meal. So you can just start by trying to incorporate a different color of fruit or vegetable at each meal or snack, so that throughout the day you will have consumed some different colors. And the key here is to be more mindful that you're eating them so that you're more aware and can make healthier choices. And you definitely want to choose water over juice as your choice of drink, as juice doesn't provide much nutrients or fiber, as it is primarily a concentrated form of fruit sugar. So even if it comes from a natural source, the body responds to it the same way because sugar is just sugar. So whether it's honey, fruit sugar, white sugar, brown sugar, it's all the same. They're just different forms of sugar. And an example to make this clearer is if you've ever used like a juicing machine or like squeezed out the juice of fruits like oranges, it takes approximately 3 oranges to make 1 cup of juice. And the typical person wouldn't eat 3 oranges in one sitting. So this just means we're consuming a lot more sugar than we need. And your body also doesn't register juice in the same way as eating the actual fruit or vegetable because there's no chewing involved. So it can be easy to drink too much juice without feeling full. However, that's not to say to never drink juice if you enjoy it. Having half a glass once in a while is fine. Just keep in mind, like all other foods, we need to eat everything in moderation. So now moving on to protein foods. So why protein foods? First off, it helps us to develop and maintain muscles. So when you go to exercise, definitely don't forget to replenish your body. And it's also needed for many essential bodily processes because enzymes, hormones, hair and nails, etc. are all made up of protein. So nutritional requirements state that we only need 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight of protein daily. And there's no need to worry about not getting enough protein because 98 to 100% of Canadians are actually meeting this daily need already. And so when we think of proteins, we usually associate it with animal meats and products. But with the new food guide, there's actually an emphasis in many plant sources of protein. And a bonus that comes with plant protein sources is that it often comes with low to no saturated fats while containing good fats like omega-3, fibers, and it's also easy to prepare. And recording. And yeah, so moving on to how can we incorporate healthy protein sources into our diet. So here are some examples of foods and ways to use them, and we have just separated into plant and animal-based proteins. So the plant-based sources are usually easier to prepare and are relatively cheap depending on what you buy, as you can purchase it canned, ready to eat, or frozen. And some examples include nuts and seeds, beans, legumes such as edamame, lentils, and chickpeas, and fortified soy products. So some low-cost animal options include eggs, which you can buy in bulk, so usually they come in cartons of 12 or 18. Lean meat and poultry, which you can try to buy on sale if you can cook it within a few days of purchase, or buy in bulk and freeze it after you've portioned it, and that can be either raw or cooked. And there's also canned fish and low-fat dairy products. And for your dairy products, Greek-style yogurt is higher in protein than regular yogurt. So although it's slightly more expensive, it definitely makes a good snack because protein keeps you feeling fuller for a longer period of time, which is especially helpful during those three-hour lectures. And you can also buy bags of milk if you're using lots, or buy blocks of cheese instead of slices. Now, our last food category, which is whole grains. So when choosing whole grain products, you just want to try to choose the whole grain or whole wheat version as often as possible. So whole grains contain the whole kernel of a grain. So as you can see in the diagram, it includes the bran and the endosperm and the germ. But the bran and the endosperm is where all the fiber holes and B vitamins are actually contained in. So if you choose refined grain products like white bread, regular pasta, most of the fiber and the B vitamins are actually lost through processing, and therefore you're consuming a lot less nutrients. So the main takeaway for this food group is just to try to choose whole grain or the whole wheat version of the food as often as possible. So one way to ensure that the product you're buying is the whole grain version is to check the ingredient list. So if a product is truly using the whole grain version, on the ingredient list you will find the word whole grain followed by the name of the grain. So for example, like whole grain oats. And this should also be the first ingredient on the list, meaning that the food product is made mostly from nutritious whole grains. And the front of the packaging might also have like statements saying made from 100% whole grains. And whole grain is also the original version of every grain product, so it's available in many different forms. And you can also use whole wheat dough, brown rice, whole grain pasta, whole grain cereals, and much more. Lastly, try as many different grains as you can because there's so many out there, and some unheard ones as well. And although they may cost a little extra or may take longer to cook and may require some more water, it's definitely worth it because good things take time.
Okay, so we did cover a lot of information just in the last little bit. I'm going to try to summarize some takeaway tips with a little bit more in considering whether or not you are buying into a meal plan. In general, when we're looking at the 3 different food categories, starting first with vegetables and fruits, Stacy had said that the food guide really pushes to get a variety of vegetables and fruits every day, making it at least half of your plate, half of what your meal or snack might look like. And unfortunately, in the colors and in the category of vegetables, regular potatoes and corn don't count. They're too high in starch. So you'll have to look at all the other options and all the other different colors. But sweet potatoes do count. So there's your substitute. I love that Stacy had the example for incorporating different colors at each meal. It's challenging to have all these varieties at every single meal. None of our plates look like the actual food guide. But if you have, red strawberries for breakfast, and then you have green spinach for lunch, then you're incorporating more colors. And, if you can only do 2 different colors a day, that's fine. It depends on, what's available and what you're able to do, but making those changes will really be worthwhile in getting all the nutrients that you would need. And again, avoiding having juice too often. Instead, it's good to focus on eating our whole fruits and vegetables because that's the way that nature intended. Blenders weren't invented until not that long ago, so we didn't essentially need them to digest the nutrients from vegetables and fruits. And of course, water should be the beverage that we aim to have most of the day, having about 6 to 8 cups if possible. And if you are someone who forgets to drink water regularly, setting an alarm every 1 to 2 hours to drink 1 cup of water, having that reminder on your phone, and keeping a large water bottle with you throughout the day can be very helpful. Being hydrated also helps us to be more alert and awake. And you'll find that your mind is clearer than if you hadn't drank enough water. As for protein sources of foods, so having protein sources at each meal is essential to building those muscles and also helping you to feel full and satisfied even a few hours after eating. So there's less of that energy crash, especially the post-lunch slump. So it's important to have a protein source at each meal. When you're purchasing something to eat for a meal and a snack, try to choose more plant-based protein options like nuts and seeds, legumes like lentils and edamame, fortified soy milks. They can be super easy. You don't really need to cook them. They're already ready to go for the most part. Do be aware that if you're looking at unfortified soy milks or alternative milks like oat milk, rice, or almond milks, they can be lower in protein and contain some levels of sugar, and so they're not sources of protein, and you don't need to rely on those. When we're looking at lean protein sources like poultry, seafood, lean cuts of meat like pork loin or extra lean ground beef, you can trim off the fat off the sides of certain cuts of meat. So there's lots of options in healthy animal-based sources as well. But you can even aim for something like Meatless Mondays and try to balance your plant-based diet with your animal-based protein sources. And of course, we have our dairy products. There are some lower sugar, lower fat options, like just plain old Greek yogurt is such a great source of protein. Just not like a three-quarter cup of Greek yogurt is 18 grams of protein. So you can get like a lot of bang for your buck, even though it's a more expensive yogurt. It keeps you full for longer. It gives you the protein that you need for your body. And you can choose lower sugar options. That's the plain version, and add your own toppings like fresh or frozen fruit, granola, drizzle of honey, and nuts. You could do a lot of things with that for breakfast or for snack. And finally, with our whole grain foods, this is one of the easier adjustments that I find anyone can even start today. When you're looking for what you're having in your meals, typically people would have a carbohydrate source to go with their meals, so like a bread or a pasta or rice. And so you can just look for the 100%, the whole grain version of that grain product, whole grain or whole wheat, preferably whole grain. And there's so many varieties to choose from, including things like whole grain popcorn can be a good snack, whole grain like tortilla chips from the whole corn kernel are also options for adding that fiber and B vitamins to your diet. With the additional different kinds of grains like quinoa or bulgur, these can be more aromatic, nuttier substitutes to rice. You might find it more interesting or tasty. And although they can be more expensive and they take more time to cook and they require a bit more water, they are great options to just switch things up too. And some more tips, especially if you are not buying into a meal plan and you are preparing your own meals, make sure that you plan ahead. just taking time once a week to think about what you want to cook for yourself for that week. Maybe it's one meal a day, maybe it's all 3 meals a day, but then making a list, going shopping, cooking, and then keeping it in your fridge or freezer can save you so much time and money and brain work in the long run. So you can have all these pre-prepped healthy meals ready ahead of time. When you're going to the grocery store, start by first looking at what's on sale. If budget is something that's important to you, read the flyers, either the paper ones or the flip apps. There's tons of flyer apps that'll show you and help you hone in on the ingredients that you are interested in and want to look for on sale. And also items that are in season, like berries. Strawberries will shortly be in season in Ontario, if not already. They are much cheaper than when they're not in season, and they taste so much better when they're local. Also, when you're at the grocery store, when you actually get there, bring your list so you can focus in on what you want to buy instead of what your appetite might be feeling like that day. And shop first on the edges of the store around the sides, because that's where they sell all the fresh vegetables and fruits, and then you have your whole grains, and then you have your fresh meats, and then in the middle of the store are the aisles full of the non-perishables, the canned, the dried stuff, which there are healthy options you can choose from there, staple items like canned beans or fish, but typically those are the items that are highly processed as well. When possible, buy in bulk or on sale, and then freeze your extra portions like Stacey had mentioned earlier. And so with a lot of vegetables and fruits and plant-based protein foods, you can purchase them dried or canned. They can be at a lower cost than fresh if it's not in season, and also they last very long on your shelves and you can have them on hand in your pantry. And again, with whole grain food products, you're looking for the whole grain version, and when you look at the nutrition facts label, it will show you how much fiber is in it. So typically a quality whole grain bread, one average slice from a loaf would have 2 grams of fiber, as opposed to less than 1 gram in white slices of bread. And then finally, choosing water over pop or juice or anything with added sugars. And of course, batch cooking. I mean, even like if you want to prepare your breakfast ahead of time, hard boil 5 to 7 eggs on Sunday, and then you have a protein source for breakfast for the rest of the week. It's so worthwhile in the long run. Even if you make small steps, don't like go like full master chef, just like start with 1 meal or 1 snack a day. And you can like really, you could see the difference, and it might inspire you to try new things the next week. And whether or not you are buying into a meal plan or your family is cooking for you, which is awesome, or purchasing food items for you, we all want to look for food items that are lower in saturated fat, lower in sodium or salt, added salt, lower in sugar. And we can find out these, like what's low in this based on the nutrition facts table. There's an example here on the slide. And there you'll notice that there's a percent daily value on the right side of the label. And it'll show you what percent of that nutrient is being provided out of the percentage, like 100% of what your daily needs are. So if something is low in that nutrient, then it would be less than 5%. 5 to 10 is like a medium, like amounts, like percent daily value, and then 15% or higher is like it's a high source of that nutrient. So I mean, things like iron or calcium, like things that you essentially need every day, you want to have food sources that are higher in those nutrients, but things like sugar, salt, fat, you want to have lower, because they can lead to a lot of chronic illnesses if we have a lot of it over time. And of course, just remembering that Canada's Food Guide, it now is supposed to be a tool for you to better understand and compare what you're eating now to what the evidence-based guidelines recommend. So make sure you're getting the variety, the balance, that your plate has more vegetables and fruits, and you're having high quality lean proteins and whole grain products. Just one more section of the food guide that was new to this edition that came out last year is that in addition to what we eat, it's how we eat. So a lot of these can seem like common sense guidelines for more enjoyable and mindful eating, but it definitely doesn't come naturally, especially in the time where screens, our laptops, TV, I mean, like COVID it's like you're stuck at home and Netflix is right there and you eat all your meals at home. But being mindful of like where you're eating, of what your food tastes like, smells like, how you're enjoying it, how full you feel, is very important to the experience of eating. And it actually takes our body, our stomach, to communicate to our brain that we're actually full. It takes 20 minutes. So if we are eating very, very quickly, we might end up overeating, eating too much. And then by the time our brain actually recognizes that we're full, we're like way too full. So it's important to be mindful, both for the health of ourselves physically, for healthy weights, but also to better enjoy what we're eating. And that's part of enjoying our food, is also trying new recipes or cuisines. If you're in Toronto, you have access to so many different kinds of cultural foods. Take advantage of that. And then trying new like spices, cultural foods, and then taking those skills into the kitchen, if that's something that you have a little bit of food skills and you want to develop them more, or you have lots and you want to cook also with others, like that's such a great thing in terms of saving money. And also being able to know what goes in your food. You can control the sugar, salt, fat that goes in your food. You can flavor it the way you like, add ingredients that you like, and then you can create meals for yourselves throughout the week so you don't have to think about it, right? Batch cooking. And when you have your meal all together, it's so important and so nice to be able to eat with others if that's possible. This is something that even I'd mentioned earlier with communion. Eating with others is a gift, and it makes food more enjoyable. It helps to foster relationships with others as well. We congregate over meals, whether we go out for coffee or we have parties with, snacks or potlucks. We are inclined as human beings to eat together, and that's probably one of the better ways to eat. And finally, just mentioning to be mindful of screen time and distractions while you're eating, and being aware that food is being marketed to us oftentimes by companies that are producing very highly processed foods. So just be aware that the best foods for us are the ones that are in their whole form, in their natural form, not necessarily pre-made in a box. So try to make healthy food choices by focusing on the whole foods first. Okay, and so for your additional interest in when you're developing a meal plan or thinking of how to cook in batches, or just even additional information on anything nutrition related, here are some resources. These links are working as of May 2020. And I hope you find some gems here. There's some really good resources. Okay, so we're really glad you could join us, and hoping that you were able to glean some takeaway tips from this presentation. If you have any questions or you'd like to connect with regards to something related to this presentation, or the nutrition program at Ryerson or food and nutrition, I'd be happy to reach out. My email address is there, and also I'm on LinkedIn and Facebook as Karmen More. Thank you very much.
Thank you.